Hello and welcome to this morning's coffee conversation at Hughlane Gallery, Dublin. The starting point for today's discussion is the painting Figurazione, pictured here by German artist Willi Baumeister. This work was painted in 1945 in oil on paper, mounted on board, measuring 28 by 39.5 centimetres. It comes from a later period in Baumeister's career, over the course of which he was an extremely prolific maker, creating approximately 2,000 paintings, 2,200 drawings, and 240 prints in his lifetime, among other pieces of significant writing and design work. Willi Baumeister was born in Stuttgart in 1889, the third child of Wilhelm and Anna, pictured here with his sister Clara and brother Hans in 1893. His father was a royal court chimney sweep, having studied mechanical engineering before taking over the family business. His mother was the daughter of a decorative painter and very artistically talented herself. She encouraged Baumeister's early creative impulses, and by age 16 he had decided to study at the Art Academy. Before this, however, he was requested by his father to train as a decorative painter, and he completed these studies ahead of time and was admitted to the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Stuttgart to study drawing. Following this, from 1907 to 1908, Baumeister completed his military service and is pictured here in 1907, aged 18. After this, he returned to his artistic studies, during which time he met and began a lifelong friendship with Oskar Schlemmer, who went on to have a career in painting, sculpture, design and choreography, as a significant figure with the Bauhaus movement. The pair are pictured here much later, in 1929, in a photograph taken at the Baumeister family home in Frankfurt by Baumeister's wife Margrethe. In 1911, Baumeister studied briefly in Paris, where he encountered the art of Paul Cézanne, which had a lifelong influence on him. In these early years, he had an interest in Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, and Cézanne's work is credited as bridging the development of Post-Impressionism into Cubism, the first truly abstract art movement. At this time, he also read Wassily Kandinsky's recently published landmark text concerning the spiritual in art, which outlined his journey into abstraction, citing the influence of the writings and philosophies of Goethe and Schiller, both of whom had been of interest to Baumeister since his school days. This work by Kandinsky from 1910, the same year as the publication of his text, is considered to be his first abstract work and perhaps the first moment of abstract art in the world. Around this time, Baumeister had his first exhibition in Galerie Neupert, Zurich, in 1912, where he exhibited 73 paintings, all of which sold. From 1914 to 1918, he served in the First World War, following which he resumed his studies in Stuttgart. He also exhibited in the June 1918 Expressionist exhibition at the Kunsthaus Schaller in Stuttgart, which proved to be a provocative exhibition in conservative circles due to the modernity of the works. Oskar Schlemmer, who co-organised the show with his brother Karl, wrote to Baumeister, quote, "There was apparently an uproar in Stuttgart. My brother writes that Inspector Schmid, the spokesperson for the Academy professors, was in a rage. The police had to step in. Now we've made our mark in Stuttgart and people will have to reckon with us." This post-war time was a renewed beginning for Baumeister's career and development of his multi-faceted output. In 1919, he joined the November Group, a group of radical avant-garde artists based in Berlin, and along with Oskar Schlemmer formed the Uit Group in Stuttgart as a local branch of the November Group. Now that he could return to the studio away from his wartime duties, he was able to devote himself to his artistic explorations. Some works from the early 1920s include Figurate with Red Ellipse, 1920, oil and sand on canvas, 65 by 50 centimetres. Constructive Composition 1921, Charcoal, Coloured Chalk, Watercolour and Airbrush on paper, 40 by 26 centimetres. Composition 1922, Gouache, Crayon and Pencil on paper, 32 by 21 centimetres. The Painter 1921 to 1922, Charcoal, Coloured Chalk, Watercolour and Airbrush on paper, 52 by 35 centimetres. Composition 1925, Lithograph, 42 by 27 centimetres. In these works we can see the development of Baumeister's imagery into further abstracted line, shape and form, combining flat surfaces with the use of texture through use of non-traditional material sand, which would be further developed in his later works. In the final work here, he uses lithography, a print technique that was also used for poster making in design. The 1920s were a huge time for transformation in the disciplines of art and design across Europe, and parallel to his fine art practice, Baumeister began another significant strand of his career, working as a designer in typography and stage sets. Another significant moment in his personal life was meeting Marguerite Ohm, who was a practicing artist at the time, and who Baumeister married in 1926. These were very active years for Baumeister. He expanded his network through travel, meeting artist Fernand Lager and architect Le Corbusier in Paris. He designed many stage sets, including the Handel opera Ariodante at the Landestheater in Stuttgart. And he exhibited at the Great Berlin Art Exhibition of 1927, where his work was well received and where he also became acquainted with Kazimir Malevich. The most significant event of the same year was his work for the Deutscher Werkbund exhibition, The Apartment. This took place at the famous Wiesenhof estate, for which he was commissioned to design the typography and interiors for this large-scale exhibition. Another notable typographic commission included his 1926 logo design for the manufacturing company Bosch, which was founded in his home city of Stuttgart. Baumeister later wrote to friend and biographer Eduardo Westerdahl in 1948, quote, "I always had two activities. One, typography, poster, stage, textile, design, and so on. Two, fine art, with which I could consistently make modern art without compromises or concessions." Added to these activities was Baumeister's appointment to a teaching position at the Municipal School of Applied Arts in Frankfurt, which he was offered on the basis of his exceptional typographic skills and experience. At this time, Frankfurt was undergoing vast architectural developments, employing the most progressive architects and designers. Baumeister was there teaching not abstract painting, but the commercial arts of design and typography. His own practice declined and he felt the strain of this role, writing to Oskar Schlemmer that, quote, "In the morning I am continually burdened with 25 students, conducting critiques, also school-like supervision, about arriving punctually, admonishing the inexcusable, reminding, scolding, a hideous drill sergeant job. In addition, the very complicated workshops, large composing room, photo, spraying, printing, designing diplomas for the city, supervising, printing, being responsible. On 2 afternoons, I give ongoing instruction for beginners and fashion class. The other afternoons remain for me to work, or incidentally paint, as one can call it. In the evening at home, I sometimes pull myself together to make pencil drawings. My drawings, especially the new ones, are the best that I have made up to now. Should I ever be relieved of this torture, I will be well trained, like the runner who for training runs with 10-pound weights in order to one day discard them for the final sprint. Baumeister would soon be relieved of this role in a most unexpected way with the appointment of Hitler as German Chancellor in January 1933. In mid-February, the Nazi Party took hold of Frankfurt City Hall, and by March the art school had a new director who ordered the dismissal of Baumeister among others from their teaching positions. Quote, I inform you that I renounce your further teaching activity at the School of Applied Arts. I request you refrain from any official act and evacuate your previous working space by April 8th. By now, Baumeister and his wife had a 4-year-old daughter, Christa, and in the month that they returned to Stuttgart, their second child, Felicitas, was born. Baumeister now had more time to dedicate to his painting and drawing practice, and worked with many different styles during the 30s. From the mid-20s, his imagery had softened, developing from his constructivist compositions to the reintroduction of organic forms and semi-abstract figures. He was interested in depicting figures in motion and began making images of athletic scenes inspired by sports people. Seen here in Female Runner of 1925 and Tennis Players of 1929. His works continued to soften, and from the early 1930s he entered a more painterly phase with increased texture in his works, as well as more flowing forms and developing an interest in primitive style motifs. He also experimented with an expanded use of colour as his work developed over the following decades. This large-scale work, titled Reddish Tennis, measures 100 by 80 centimetres and mixes oil and sand on canvas. Line Figure on Brown, a lithograph from 1935. Tory from 1938. Dying Swan from 1940. In 1937, the Nazi Party held an exhibition of what they termed degenerate art in Berlin. It comprised 650 artworks that had been confiscated from state museums under their regime. 5 of Baumeister's works were shown at it, with over 50 of his works having been removed from museums and partly destroyed. The exhibition was intended to culturally cleanse the country, along with the book burnings that occurred at this time, and also to educate the public on what degenerate art looked like. The artworks were exhibited alongside derogatory slogans in an effort to demean them and their creators further. In the lead up to the beginning of the war, Baumeister kept his ties with his Parisian contacts. He arranged what would be his final solo exhibition until after the war ended at the end of the Nazi regime. On his 50th birthday, in January 1939, at the Gallery Jean Boucher, he showed works on cardboard that could be transported inconspicuously, with an inventory sent separately ahead of time. For his safety, there was no catalogue produced, and the gallerist asked for no press coverage of the show. Despite all of this, the exhibition attracted a vast audience from the art world of Paris, including visits by Juan Moreau, Le Corbusier, Gertrude Stein, Max Ernst, Vasily Kandinsky, and Hans Arp. Pictured here with Baumeister at his studio in later, safer times. Baumeister again exhibited in the gallery in 1949, as the first German artist to have a solo show after the war, pictured here unpacking his artworks. The war was a difficult time in which Baumeister had limited space and resources to make his artwork. His family spent some time near the Swabian Alps after their Stuttgart home was mostly destroyed by a bomb. His daughter described how the family would sit around a table, each of them with only a small corner of it to tend to their tasks. It was here that Baumeister focused on his writing, and in the years from 1943 to 1945 he wrote his landmark art theory book titled The Unknown in Art, later published in 1947. In the year following the end of the war, he took up a new professorship role at the Stuttgart Academy, this time teaching in the fine arts through painting and drawing. Baumeister and his colleagues began teaching in the buildings of the former art school that had been badly damaged during the war, and it was here that he also set up his working studio. On the role of the art professor, he said, quote, "The teacher has to empty, not to fill with his formulae. He ultimately has the task of bringing the student into the artistic state through purification, through emptying." The artwork by Willi Baumeister in the hughlane collection, Figurazione, was painted in 1945, the year that the war ended. In these works of the late 1940s, the artist painted abstracted animal forms and symbols, inspired by non-Western art and also by ancient cave paintings. These works are full of texture, with the artist often using sand along with paint and resin. He also used a comb to create unique texture and form in his works. Visible here in blue figure jumble 1947 and Poetry with White Forms 1949. Into the 1950s he remained as prolific as ever, further developing his image explorations in new directions, working with themes of magic, mythology and the cosmos, as well as brightening his palette, visible here in Faust in Magic 1952, a large-scale work at 81 centimeters by 100 centimeters, and Kesu of 1954, made with oil, synthetic resin, filler putty and sand on canvas board. In his final years, he worked on a series of large-scale works that incorporated large black forms surrounded by an area of crisp, bright colour, further exploring abstracted concepts of the cosmos. He is pictured here in the year of his death, working on a large piece from this Aru series. Following his death in 1955, his family saw to it that his work was cared for, with a dedicated vision to continuing his legacy. His youngest daughter, Felicitas, took on the role of organising his estate, and later collaborated with the Stuttgart Museum to set up the Willi Baumeister Archive in 2005, where his work has continued to be shared and celebrated through online digital access and physical exhibition.